All four sites are examining their philosophy and mission. None of them chose to focus on student support and its involvement and diversity and inclusion involvement on the campus, which is why we chose to bring Sam Museus here today. As Sam, as our keynote, will be talking about creating a culturally engaging campus environment. Virtue's role has been one that we have worked very hard at making sure that we had a diverse team of faculty and staff with different racial and ethnic backgrounds, and we devoted time to discussing this work to be aware of our own biases so that when we were facilitating campuses to do their work, we were doing so in a way that fit the culture of the campus and the organization. We served as the backbone organization, asking tough questions, keeping the process moving forward, and holding participants accountable. The data collection, analysis, and assessment are done by the campuses. Project Inclusion has been an excellent demonstration of how Virtue fulfills its mission and objectives, as you see as are listed on the screen. So now you know my story and the story of the rubric and the Project Inclusion process. I hope I've given you the foundation you need to get the most out of the presentations you're about to hear. It is now my pleasure to introduce the Director of NERCHI and Professor of Higher Education at UMass Boston, John Saltmark, who will introduce our keynote speaker. Thank you very much.
Sam, but we got to find him. He is here. So do you want to just see if he's... So hang on for a second. There he is. That was good. That was quite an entrance. All right, so I'm going to be fairly quick here, but it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce Dr. Samuel D Museus, Associate Professor of Higher Education and Student Affairs at Indiana University in Bloomington. And he also serves as the founding director of what's called the Culturally Engaging Campus Environments Project, or CC. And I just want to say that we've provided all of the pilot campuses that we're working with the CC model of college success. It's called the Model of College Success Among Racially Diverse Populations, as one of the tools that could be used both to complement and supplement the NERCHI rubric that's being used by the campuses. Dr. Museus' model and survey is research-based. He's published over 200 publications and conference presentations focused on understanding diversity and equity and race and culture, campus environments, diverse populations in higher education. He's produced 10 books, including Creating Campus Cultures, Fostering Success Among Racially Diverse Student Populations in 2012, and the book Racism and Racial Equity in Higher Education in 2015. His work has been featured in national and international media outlets such as NPR, and he's received several national awards and recognition of the impact of his scholarship, including the Association for the Study of Higher Education's Early Career Award in 2011, and the NASPA Student Affairs Professionals George D.Q. Outstanding Contributions to Research and Literature Award in 2014. Dr. Museus also consults and conducts assessments at institutions around the country that aim to cultivate more inclusive and equitable campus environments. On a more personal level, I had the privilege of having Dr. Museus as a colleague in the higher education doctoral program at UMass Boston from 2007 to 2011, where he taught courses such as critical race theory, race in students of color in higher education, the impact of college on students. And for me, what distinguishes Dr. Museus' diversity work is that it's grounded in campus experiences as well as in research. That is, it brings together evidence-based practice as well as practice-based evidence. I appreciate deeply the commitment and values he brings to this work and its inescapable authenticity. He walks the walk. We're incredibly fortunate to have him join us here today, so please join me in welcoming Dr. Samuel D Museus.
Hi, everybody. How are you all doing? Great. I apologize for joining you late. I ran into a little traffic between Hogan Airport here. I'm supposed to stall for a couple minutes. I want to start off by telling you a couple stories. I like to tell stories to kind of humanize and concretize some of the ideas that I talk about throughout the presentation. So the first is about the experience I had when I sat on a diversity and success strategic planning committee for a university several years ago. And I went to the first couple of meetings because I wanted to see what this committee was about. I was invited to be on it, and I thought that the goals were noble, but I wanted to go sort of see if, you know, it was going to be a waste of time, like a lot of committees are, or if it was actually going to do something impactful. So for the first two meetings, we had serious conversations, 2 hours twice, over the course of like 3 weeks, so a total of 4 hours. We were having these conversations, and they all revolved around questions like, what kind of data do we have to figure out when students are dropping out? Because the charge of the committee was to figure out how to increase success rates among underrepresented students. We got stuck in this rut and sort of revolving circle around questions like these. And I knew from my research that this was probably not the most critical question we needed to be asking and answering, because if you figure out, my thinking, if we figure out that students are dropping out in the third semester, what's the plan, the game plan? Are we going to target the same things that are not working more in the third semester and concentrate? That's problematic for multiple reasons. One is that if the things aren't working, giving them more of it at a certain point in their trajectory might not work either. But the second thing is, we also know that students don't turn on a dime and make a decision to drop out halfway through their college career. Sometimes they're formulating their goals and deciding what they need to do to achieve those goals, and determining that, you know, moving forward and persisting and getting a college degree is not going to get them where they want to go, or that they're not capable of succeeding. Or so I talked to the chair of the committee, and I said, you know, I think we need to like shake this up and talk about some other things. So I said, why don't we go talk to some students? So I went and interviewed a few students on campus, just to hear from their voices what they were saying about why people were not succeeding. And the things that I heard were things like, you know, a lot of the courses, we just can't connect with them, they don't seem relevant. You know, we can't find the support that we need. Like, we go to an office and then we get sent to another one, and then they send us to another one, and we get shuffled around until we just eventually give up. So I brought that voice and those data back to the committee. And some people were receptive and some people were not so receptive, and somewhat dismissive of what the students were saying. The reason why I like to bring this example up is because I think it does a really good job at very saliently disconnect between what many faculty and administrators are assuming should be prioritized and talked about in these conversations about diversity and success, and what the students actually are experiencing. And to sort of link this back to John's comments about bridging campus-based voice and practice and research, and I think it's important to bridge those in both directions, to figure out what's going on with students on campus and how they're experiencing programs and various activities, and then generate tools, research and assessment tools that can then help inform future practice to serve students. So I'm going to share with you a couple examples today of how we've done that, and it sounds like, how many people in here have had a chance to read about the model, the CC framework? Okay, so this will be, looks like a few of you, so this will be a good introduction. So the second story I wanted to share with you was about a student I interviewed in Hawaii, who was a native Hawaiian student, and I'll call her Teresa. Teresa was from a community where she was taught as she grew up that her purpose, one of her purposes, was to serve her community. So she decided that she was going to be a physician. She went to med school at a large flagship research university on the West Coast. And Teresa really quickly learned over the course of the first semester that pre-med at that institution did not allow her to achieve her goals. Because although pre-med was designed to teach you the mechanics of medicine, it was done from a very Western perspective, one, and it didn't center or take into account the issues that were most salient to her community, like the health disparities that existed within the Native Hawaiian community. So she increasingly, over the course of that semester, felt less and less relevant to the institution and to the pre-med program, and eventually decided to leave track and gravitated toward ethnic studies, because that was where she found spaces where she could be herself, develop some of the skills that would allow her to become a better leader in her community, because the education was relevant. And I like to share this example because that's not an uncommon story. When we talk to students around the country, especially students from marginalized populations, the notion of seeking an education that's relevant to one's community, one's family, one's identity is a recurring theme. It's very important. The problem is that a lot of students never have the opportunity to access those kinds of spaces. So these tools are about rethinking our education systems and our institutions so that we are providing that kind of space for all students, regardless of their racial or ethnic or socioeconomic or religious background. The project that I direct at Indiana University is partly based on the CC framework and the survey that I'm going to talk about. But it's a little bit larger than that. It's sort of this conglomeration of studies and initiatives that are designed to help inform efforts to become more inclusive and equitable, and provide institutions with tools that can maybe enhance their capacity, or that they can add to their toolbox as they move forward with those kinds of efforts. And it's founded on these 4 pillars. The first one is equity. And when I say equity, I mean creating systems that, I don't mean giving everybody the same thing. That's what I would call equality. I mean creating systems that are designed to allow everybody to thrive, to give everybody what they need to thrive in educational spaces. The second pillar is transformation, and it's the idea that in order for us to really change that is not isolated, that is not surface level, but is both deep and pervasive across the institution. So transformational change. The third one is a common vision, and the framework that I am going to present to you is designed to give institutions one way to think about developing a common vision for their inclusion and equity efforts. I think this is important because we use a lot of terms like diversity and inclusion and equity and inclusive excellence and multiculturalism, and the list goes on. But when you take one of those terms and you ask somebody, well, what does that look like? How do you define that? What are the core elements of that? A lot of times you'll get 30 different answers from 30 different people. So this is supposed to provide an evidence-based framework that can at least get everybody somewhat on the same page about where their institutions need to go or what their institutions need to look like if they're really moving toward equity and get there 10 or 20 years down the road. And then the last point up there is inquiry and evidence, and the idea that research and assessment is critical to moving these kinds of efforts forward, particularly because students' voices are critical to understanding what we need to do to serve them. So we need to listen to them in order to know what they need and also engage their voices in transformation efforts. Because one of the things that I've noticed visiting campuses around the country is that those voices are one of the most powerful levers for change because they humanize a lot of the problems, the diversity and inclusion problems that exist on campus, so that other people can develop a commitment and a sense of caring about those issues.